Today, we're heading to the top of the world, the highest points on Earth, the Himalayas. These mountains shaped our planet, and without them, the Earth, and maybe even us, might not exist as we know it. One cool thing about these high altitudes is that if you take a walk around the Himalayas, you're likely to stumble upon ancient marine fossils. Yeah, marine fossils. That means these mountains were once underwater. And when we say ancient fossils, we don't mean just a few thousand or even a few million years ago. We're talking hundreds of millions of years. Here, you might find trilobites that are around 450 million years old. Trilobites were some of Earth's oldest sea creatures, with a look somewhat like cockroaches. These creatures were so common that you could find them almost anywhere on Earth, but they went extinct about 250 million years ago. Is it just me, or do you feel this way too? I mean, sometimes when I go to kill a cockroach, I feel a bit guilty since we, modern humans, have only been around for about 100,000 years, or if you count early hominins, maybe around 3 million years. But even that is nothing compared to their 300 million years on this planet. Anyway, moving on from cockroaches, let's see why these high-altitude areas were underwater. The Himalayas, often called the roof of the world, are incredibly tall. The tallest peak in the Himalayas is Mount Everest, known as the highest point on Earth from sea level, though it's not the closest peak to outer space. The story of the Himalayas begins about 450 million years ago when they were completely underwater and not even a mountain range. Back then, during what's called the Ordovician period, Earth's land looked totally different. If you look at the area behind the Himalayas on a map today, that is, southwest China, you'll see the Tibetan Plateau, a dry, cold, desert-like area. This plateau existed back then too, but without what we'd call a nose, meaning the Indian subcontinent wasn't there yet. But no worries, it was on its way, though it took hundreds of millions of years to arrive. You probably wouldn't believe it, but it's only about 55 million years ago that this chunk of land collided with Tibet, with the subcontinent finally settling in, and the pressure it caused formed the massive Himalayas we know today. Notice that this happened after the dinosaurs went extinct. So in comparison to the Earth's age, the Himalayas are actually pretty young. Before India slammed into Tibet, it was covered in rainforests, while Tibet was already high, dry, and cold. And today, it's still that way. But when this collision happened and the Himalayas formed, Tibet's situation got worse. It became even colder and drier due to something called the rain shadow effect. When the collision happened, the Himalayas began to rise rapidly, much faster than most other mountain ranges, and they're still growing a few millimeters each year. If you look at the Himalayas from space, you can see the lush green to the south and the barren desert to the north, Tibet. It's the perfect example of the rain shadow effect. If you look further into Tibet, western and northern China, or even Mongolia, you'll see that they're pretty much deserts. All that dryness is thanks to the Himalayas acting as a massive barrier, keeping rain clouds from crossing over. The Himalayas essentially turned these lands into deserts, forcing the animals that had lived there for millions of years to either go extinct or migrate, kind of like closing the door on Central Asia's prosperity. Remember at the start of the video, we said this mountain range changed the whole planet, and that without it, we might not even be here. But how? Well, the Himalayas caused the average temperature of the Earth to drop significantly. Before they formed, the land on Earth had a more tropical climate. Even Antarctica was green and full of life. What cooled Earth down was the decreasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And, as you probably know, CO2 is a greenhouse gas that causes global warming. Back then, the levels of this gas started to drop. And this mountain range was the main reason why. In the 1980s, a bunch of scientists and geologists headed to the Himalayas to dig deeper into the region's history. They found that as the Himalayas were forming and growing, rain clouds would form around the mountains, clouds packed with carbon. So when these clouds started raining, they brought acid rain that washed away carbon, sending it down to the ocean floor. And this went on for millions of years. As all this carbon rained down, it eroded rocks and carried them into the ocean, reducing the carbon levels in the atmosphere. And like we said, CO2 is a greenhouse gas, warming the Earth. So if there's less of it, Earth cools down. As this happened, the planet got cooler century by century, and tropical climates pulled back toward the equator. That's why many scientists say the Himalayas changed the world. Without them, our world would be totally different. Keep in mind, though, that this whole rain and erosion process is way more complex than this, but I tried to simplify it. Anyway, one of the biggest changes the Himalayas caused was in Antarctica. Like we mentioned, before the Himalayas existed, Antarctica was green. But the drop in CO2 and the cooling of Earth, both influenced by the Himalayas, made Antarctica colder, turning it into the coldest place on Earth. Before that, Antarctica wasn't just green, it had tons of plants and different animals living there, which all went extinct because of the cold. The only animals left now are emperor penguins and a few others that stick to the coast, the warmest parts of Antarctica. Go deeper into Antarctica, and the temperature drops so much that nothing can survive there, except humans with heavy-duty equipment. They say Antarctica is the driest place on Earth, but why? There's all this ice and snow, so how's it dry? It's because it's so cold there that any moisture in the air just freezes and falls to the ground, leaving the air extremely dry. Another big impact of the Himalayas was the creation of the Sahara Desert. The Sahara, as we mentioned in a few videos, used to be a lush green area but became this vast desert. And one of the reasons is the Himalayas. And it's not just there. This desert effect continues with the Arabian deserts, the deserts of Iran, Turkmenistan, parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it reaches all the way to Central Asia. Just think about it. One mountain range has left this massive impact on Earth. The reason is the rain shadow effect, which many mountain ranges in this area cause. The Himalayas are young compared to Earth's age, but in just 55 million years, they've reshaped the whole planet. They've caused the extinction of many species and led to the rise of new ones, like mammals, primates, and eventually humans. Maybe if the geography hadn't turned out this way, a totally different set of animals would be living on Earth, and humans might never have shown up. What do you think?